Buen día a todos, perdón la demora.
Buenis.
Ya, Silvia.
Recién salgo del taller.
Bueno,
Ah, vos estabas en taller, claro, y es martes.
Ya se está transmitiendo, les aviso.
bueno.
Bien.
Miguel, creo que no tenés audio.
Ahora sí. Bien. Buenos días a todos y todas, ahora sí. ¿Me escuchan bien ahora?
Sí, se escucha bien.
Bien.
Sí, perfecto.
Vamos a dar continuidad a nuestra actividad del Workshop Internacional Santa Fe 2020, un workshop que ha tenido características, como todos saben, muy particular debido a la situación de pandemia, no solo acá, sino en todo el mundo. Eso hablábamos también con nuestras colegas del exterior. Y vamos a recibir a dos profesoras, hoy tenemos la visita de dos profesoras del Politécnico de Milán, el nodo Piacenza, que son la arquitecta Sara Protasoni y la arquitecta Chiara Locardi. En particular, la actividad que vamos a desarrollar esta mañana es presenciar una charla de la doctora Sara Protasoni, que bien decía yo, es docente con una actividad académica y docente muy amplia. Sara viene trabajando en Piacenza por el Politécnico de Milán, además de haber trabajado en el Instituto Universitario de Arquitectura de Venecia, en el IUAP. Enseña diseño del paisaje en distintos cursos y también en maestría. Ha sido colaboradora y editora en diferentes publicaciones de orden internacionales, tales como, por citar dos, Domus y Casabella, y forma parte actualmente del doctorado de la Universidad de la Sapienza de Roma. Es autora de múltiples ensayos y monografías publicadas en libros y revistas de edición internacional en arquitectura y paisaje. Y además, algo muy importante para nosotros, integra junto con la profesora Chiara Locardi el nodo colaborador del proyecto CAI 2016 que está en curso, y fueron fantásticas anfitrionas del workshop 2018 que tuvo sede en Piacenza. Sin más presentaciones, y agradeciendo la presencia de ambas profesoras y amigas, vamos a escuchar entonces la charla sobre paisajes frágiles en torno al concepto de belleza sostenible, y desde ya, por supuesto, en nombre de nuestra casa, agradecer la presencia en este modo virtual de la profesora Sara Protasoni y de Chiara Locardi. Dejo de compartir pantalla y Chiara, cuando vos quieras, podés comenzar. Muchas gracias. Sara?
Yeah, I'll be the first, okay. Good afternoon to everyone. First, I would like to thank all the colleagues, but especially Miguel Vitale, for the invitation today for this lecture. And I'm sorry, I'm not good enough in speaking Spanish, so you have to forgive me. I will have to speak English, and I thank Daniela Mancebo who will translate for us my contribution.
Good morning, Sara.
Do you translate, or I go ahead as you prefer?
Yes, go ahead.
I go ahead. When I was invited in this workshop, international workshop, I decided to present here a lecture. It's the first time I work in public about this question, which deals on one side with the question of fragile landscapes. So all the landscapes that as architects we are used to deal with, who needs a special care, and the notion of care becomes very important. And also landscapes where the location and the condition suggest to intervene with new tools, which requires a new interdisciplinary vision, which comes from architecture, but then across other fields, from scientific science of nature, but also in the field of other more technical disciplines. On the other side, the lecture tries to talk about the notion of sustaining beauty, which is a category which was introduced in the debate a few years ago by more than one researcher and landscape architect, but especially by Elizabeth Meyer, who wrote a very important manifesto about this question. You want to translate now, or how do we organize the translation?
Yes. Bueno, que es Sara que se pide disculpas por no poder dar la charla en español, que no hay problema, y que va a hablar sobre paisajes frágiles, la belleza sostenible, que es la primera vez que está invitada a un workshop a hacer esta presentación, que bueno, que los arquitectos tenemos que tener especial atención en el paisaje frágil, sobre todo en la ubicación y en la condición que se requiere. Tenemos que intentar buscar una interdisciplina entre la arquitectura, los científicos y toda la parte técnica. Esta belleza sostenible es una categoría introducida hace poco por investigadores, especialmente por Elizabeth Meyer, una arquitecta.
Okay. The first image I want to share with you express very well this field of reflection I'm proposing today. It is a photo by a very important photographer in Italy who was leading new direction of research in the field of architecture and also in the field of landscape architecture. It's portraying an abandoned industrial site where somehow the loss of use by human being suggests a very deep reflection about the quality of the space in terms of landscape, and also about the potential that this space made free provide in establish new system for consolidating the new meanings about the space left, the open space in urban context, and also open new spaces where, and this will be one of the main topics I will discuss in the lecture, where nature comes back within the city unexpected and brings back important values in terms of biodiversity.
Ahora vamos a ver una imagen que expresa muy bien esta reflexión. Es de un fotógrafo italiano, un investigador, y es sobre una industria abandonada, y podemos reflexionar, podemos hacer reflexiones muy profundas sobre el potencial de los espacios abiertos, estos nuevos espacios abiertos en donde la naturaleza empieza a tomar parte, y toda esta biodiversidad también.
I have some problem now. Somehow, starting from the essay by Elizabeth Meyer, today I would work about this main question. I will ask what is the relationship between aesthetics and sustainability. In her famous essay, Beyond Sustaining Beauty, Elizabeth Meyer makes the point that focusing solely on ecological performance is limiting the effectiveness of design, and that unless there was a major change in how the larger public perceived and felt connected to the biophysical world, this way of dealing with the question of sustainability is not enough. So the question is to work about what are the conditions for producing a truly sustainable community. And for reaching this result, we need to change everyday practices and a larger reimagination of the relationship between humans and non-human world. To care about the sustainability or resilience of the built environment requires to change how people feel about the world, not just to change the ecological performance of a place. This is a main assumption I will move from today.
Bueno, la principal pregunta es esta relación entre la estética y la sostenibilidad, que no es valioso enfocarse solamente en la sostenibilidad porque no es efectivo, no es suficiente, y que la pregunta que nos quiere hacer es cuáles son las condiciones para crear una sostenibilidad de verdad. Esto es algo que hay que cambiar en nuestro día a día, es una práctica del día a día, y sobre todo hay que cambiar la manera en que la gente se siente respecto del mundo, no solamente la sostenibilidad como un aspecto a diseñar, digamos.
In other words, we could say that the three traditional ways of intending sustainability, once we reflect about landscape, will have a fourth level. Normally, when we talk about sustainability, we think about environmental and ecological performance. Then second, we pay attention to a concern for social equity. Then, of course, also sustainability means a need for economic prosperity. But the fourth issue that landscape introduced in a very strong way is the aesthetic experience of all types, and not just beauty, which is always connected with the way we inhabit the main places of our life.
La manera tradicional de ver la sostenibilidad toma dos puntos en el cual nosotros queremos ampliar esta mirada. El primero es la parte ecológica, medioambiental. Como segunda instancia toma la equidad social, y ahora queremos introducir estos conceptos de experiencias estéticas, no solo de belleza, sino de experiencias estéticas que nos conectan con esta mirada.
Perdón, Daniela, ¿podrías
¿Sí?
pedirle que ponga pantalla completa, por favor?
Can you put a full screen so we can watch it better?
Okay. Yeah, now it's better.
Wait a moment, because it's loading.
Que desplace la flechita de la derecha, por favor.
You can touch in that arrow of the right, so we can watch it bigger, full screen. Now we are seeing a big
I'm not really
square.
Zoom, so
Clic en la flechita.
Click in the right arrow. A ver.
now it works.
Okay.
Yes. Now
Okay.
it works.
Here I collected few basic essays where I think we can find the genealogy, the origin of the questions I'm going to discuss today. There are essays from European and American culture, where basically the question of landscape became more and more understood as a really complex question, where the object of our reflection is continuously changing, requires to be analyzed at different scales, and it requires to be analyzed considering also the question of time as really important, because it is a place where, for natural reason, but also for our design and for our present in terms of human being is object of big transformation. These books are somehow, in my opinion, some reference, which are showing us a transformation not only of the consciousness of about the complexity of landscape, but also they show the evolution of the tools that in the time we developed for understanding, describing, analyzing, also mapping, and then designing the landscape according to the different goals where sustainability, defense of biodiversity, and security and defense from all the possible risk, geological and hydrogeological risk, became more and more influential. Landscape meant in all these books as something, of course, which has a presence of nature, but it is the result of a lot of different actions of human beings. Human beings, as we know from the reflection of architecture and also aesthetical reflection, human beings are always transforming the world in order to inhabit it. And in this process, they're represented, and landscape is somehow realized exactly at the point where the places and representations are meeting.
Bueno, a partir de estos libros nosotros podemos ver el origen de estas preguntas. Es una genealogía en libros sobre la cultura americana y europea. El paisaje es una pregunta muy compleja y las preguntas que nos hacen a nosotros, que nos hacemos nosotros sobre el paisaje cambian todo el tiempo. Todo el tiempo cambian por la historia y también por las distintas escalas. El diseño es parte del presente y es el objeto de transformación que nosotros tenemos. Estos libros son como la primera referencia que nos da Sara para que los leamos, para que entendamos esta complejidad que es el paisaje, que se desarrolla a lo largo del tiempo, y termina, bueno, en este diseño de la sostenibilidad, que también incorpora la seguridad, riesgos ecológicos y un montón de otras cosas a tener en cuenta. Este paisaje presenta, aparte de la naturaleza y toda la biodiversidad, los derechos humanos, y los derechos humanos son los que lo transforman.
Now, in the next part of my contribution, I will show you some precedents, some projects which belongs to the already long history of the approach to landscape architecture, where all these questions were in a way already understood and solved in an interesting way. Of course, not yet with exactly the same view that we are practicing today. So the question of finding in our disciplinary culture some precedents is for me quite interesting, because there we can discover some tools already experimented that could be very useful also for transforming the contemporary situation.
Ahora vamos a ver algunos antecedentes de proyectos, una larga historia acerca del paisaje. No son las mismas miradas que nosotros estamos por abordar, pero son una herramienta importante que tenemos para poder cambiar el presente.
The first case I would like to look back, all of us know this case very, very well, is the Parc de Buttes-Chaumont in Paris by Jean-Charles Alphand, which was inaugurated in 1867, which is considered really the starting point for a work of landscape architecture about degraded sites, abandoned sites. As now we know this park for being an incredibly beautiful place within the urban center of the city. At the origin but this is a common situation. This park was realized on a site of gypsum quarries, so a place where the production and the extraction activity destroyed completely a landscape. The material was necessary for building the Paris of the third Napoleon's the third period, where when the city of Osman was somehow developing very quickly. And all this activity left somehow an incredibly difficult place within the city, not resolved and completely separated by the idea of urban space that was leading the transformation pursued by Osman.
En este caso, bueno, este parque es un punto de entrada a todo esto de la arquitectura del paisaje y toca este tema que hablamos antes de las áreas abandonadas. Este lugar fue abandonado y dejó un lugar bastante destruido por toda la actividad de extracción y de industria en la época de Napoleón. Entonces esto fue como un área residual para construir el resto de la ciudad. La ciudad se estaba desarrollando y quedaron zonas vacantes y bastante degradadas, que por suerte tomaron valor después en el paisaje de la ciudad.
The work by Alphonse introduced an incredibly refined and attentive new configuration of the morphology of the site, starting from the original condition where the quarries open a huge holes in the ground and transform the original morphology. As you see in these two drawings, on one side, you have the master plan of the park as designed by Alphonse. In the same book where this project is represented, you see that there was an incredibly refined work in tracing the contour lines of the new organization of the Earth, which was, of course, obtained working about the pre-existing situation. Actually, it seems that until now, there are still existing some underground tunnels of the original quarries that are not accessible, but somehow it shows that the transformation was dealing with the existing situation of the site in a very precise way.
Se crea toda una nueva configuración morfológica. Este lugar tenía grandes huecos, grandes hoyos que fueron transformando la morfología original, y el master plan trabaja en una resignificación y en una reconfiguración de todos estos pasos, y trabaja con la preexistencia, ya que había muchos lugares que no eran accesibles y se abrieron paso para que se puedan acceder.
Here, a very popular image of the site before at the beginning of the intervention. It shows somehow the idea that the landscape that now we are used to know as very beautiful and bucolic context was the result of an incredibly of a very big effort for producing a completely new configuration. And what it is impressive, it is that somehow starting from the existing condition, the design intervened with a very strong and powerful capacity of transfigurating the existing condition in something which is completely different, completely new. Now we perceive this as a new nature, but it is a nature based on an incredibly impressive effort in doing with engineering tools and with work with the earth. So it's really a design of a new morphology and a new planting system to define a completely new site and completely new character for the site.
La primera imagen es al comienzo de la intervención, que es una imagen muy fuerte, y se puede ver cómo se empiezan con unas condiciones y el poder de transformación que tiene este proyecto. Parece un lugar aleatorio y natural, pero en realidad es una nueva naturaleza, y fue un trabajo de ingeniería muy importante, digamos, que creó toda una nueva morfología del lugar que es muy poderosa a la vista.
I was showing you some images of this park because if you compare this very ancient work, where it's almost 150 years ago, even more, if you look at this, you really understand what are the bases for working also now in certain context where it seems impossible to imagine new uses and new return of nature, and where with the right technical tools, implying utilizing the right technical tools, we can gain results in providing to people a completely new organization for leisure and for the aesthetical experience of landscape. Of course, we start already to understand that in the time when this park was realized, the question of understanding the potential of the pre-existing site, which was an extraction site, provided some suggestions to open also new reflection in terms of aesthetical reflection about what is the physical and intellectual and also emotional experience of people in places. So this new landscape, which was installed in La Butte Chaumont, is somehow a kind of paradigm of this idea of trying to find a new connection between the way we perceive and we inhabit the environment and our intellectual and the sensitive experience and the aesthetical dimension of our experience in the landscape.
Bueno, podemos comparar los estados de 1 a 15 años antes de este parque y cuáles son las bases para trabajar en ciertos contextos que parece imposible, porque era un lugar sumamente extractivo y residual de la ciudad. Con las herramientas adecuadas y con la técnica adecuada podemos proveer a la gente de lugares de esparcimiento de realmente buena calidad, para entender también el potencial que tienen estos lugares. Después de haber sido un lugar extractivista total, podemos tener varias reflexiones estéticas sobre cómo trabajarlos y cómo crear una experiencia intelectual y emocional para la gente bastante buena. Cómo percibimos y habitamos el lugar, tenemos que hacer foco en eso, cómo percibimos y habitamos, estética, intelectual y emocionalmente.
The next project I would like to propose you as an important precedent in the genealogy of this approach to the question of designing landscape and a new connection between aesthetical experience and also the notion of sustainability is this very famous design proposal by Luis Barragan in Mexico City, the Pedregal Gardens. Now, today it's impossible to see any longer this realization. At the time when it was built, this was an incredibly successful example in landscape architecture. In 1948, the image of this work by Barragan were even exposed in the MoMA in New York, so they became really internationally very well known thanks to the interest of Richard Neutra, who found this work incredibly fascinating.
Ahora vamos a ver el segundo caso, que es un trabajo de Luis Barragán en México, que aporta mucho a esta genealogía que estamos siguiendo sobre nueva conexión entre lo estético y lo emocional. No se puede ver más esta obra, pero en el momento que se construyó fue un ejemplo excelente y estuvo expuesto en el MoMA de Nueva York.
The work was starting with a kind of very impressive methodology. Basically, Barragán discovered a place in the city of Mexico City where a lot of volcan rocks with incredibly complex shapes, and also thermal water, and somehow a kind of set of conditions incredibly impressive, suggested him to imagine that this place, which was not inhabited by anyone, just by shepherds with their animals, could become a very beautiful and exclusive settlement of modern villa, completely new quarters for the city of Mexico City. He bought a huge amount of this land, and then he started a campaign for promoting the new, completely new image and meaning of this place, with the idea of starting a development, also economically very convenient. The work was done using both the tools of landscape architecture, but also the tools of communicating the work of landscape architecture and making really a set of publications for promoting this image. The role of photography in this work was incredibly important. Here we see an image which is collecting some of the booklets which were edited by Barragán himself, together with the photographer Armando Salas Portugal, who was always working with him. Somehow the idea was, if we use a contemporary way of defining the work of landscape architecture, to work in the same moment on landscape as something that we can consider in situ, something which is existing in itself as a place, but also something which has to be considered in visu as a representation and a set representation. The role of landscape architecture is both to transform the physical site, but also at the same time to transform the conventional representation. And in this, the new dimension of this landscape became very strong.
Bueno, usó una metodología increíble Luis Barragán, sobre todo descubrió un lugar muy particular donde había rocas volcánicas y formas complejas con agua termal, condiciones impresionantes, digamos, paisajísticas, y a la vez empezó una campaña sobre una nueva imagen de este lugar. Entonces, las herramientas que tiene esta arquitectura del paisaje son, bueno, las herramientas de transformación que tiene la arquitectura, pero también estas herramientas de comunicación y promoción a través de fotografías, revistas. Es una manera de promocionar, digamos, estos proyectos. Entonces son maneras contemporáneas para hacer arquitectura del paisaje. Entonces estamos hablando de la transformación tradicional del paisaje y a la vez la transformación de la representación de este.
This image is going even further. It shows that Barragán was also working about what, with contemporary words, we would define a palimpsest, because somehow the site was not only existing with its peculiar shape and with its peculiar aspect in terms of rocks, shapes, and also vegetation structure, but was also populated by very ancient tales and myths. Somehow the idea was also to unveil this very deep-rooted identity of the site, working along the timeline, and working together with a sculpture, an Animal del Pedregal is somehow symbolizing this ancient image and identity of this place and making a new combination with a contemporary new identity produced by the landscape architecture design.
A pesar o sea, aparte de tener estas peculiares formas y rocas, el lugar también estaba cargado de mucho simbolismo, se podría decir, por sus leyendas y cuentos antiguos. Entonces Barragán decide trabajar con estas esculturas sobre imágenes antiguas y lo combina con esta manera más contemporánea de hacer arquitectura.
Of course, these are two precedents which are bringing up some basic questions, but the questions we have to deal today with are quite different. Today, as we know, the demand for about landscapes are evolving in new direction. And according to me, if we work about this connection between aesthetics and sustainability, the main aspect which has to be analyzed is the connection between bodies, emotions, network of bodies, and system and changing ethical practices. These are all questions that are defining the new field of activity for contemporary architecture. This collection of images are somehow referring to this, and they are both works by people who devote their time to understand and represent this new condition of sites. They're all, the first images are basically photographs of disturbed sites that with new eyes could be considered with a new strong potential in terms of aesthetical quality. The image down below are representing a new disposition of landscape architecture in dealing also with the question of compromised sites, with the question of pollution, of remediation, with the question of introducing a new organization in places where the notion of habitability was somehow abandoned, definitely because of the disused and the degradation provoked by this misused, like in the case of a landfill.
Hoy nos topamos con nuevas direcciones. Lo que vimos antes eran las preguntas básicas que se hicieron en algún momento sobre el paisaje, pero hoy esto está tomando otro rumbo. El paisaje tiene una nueva visión y se pregunta otras cosas referidas a la época. Entonces, lo que a Sara le parece principal es la conexión entre los cuerpos, la emoción y estos sistemas. Después nos mostró una colección de imágenes que es un recorrido sobre gente que invierte su tiempo para entender estas nuevas representaciones y con nuevos ojos dar respuesta a estas preguntas. Hoy el paisajismo toma problemas como la contaminación, introducir una nueva organización y unos nuevos sistemas, digamos, de organización en estos paisajes.
I think with the translation, my lecture will become very long. So the next images I will just pass by very quickly. Of course, behind this reflection, there are some goals for the contemporary societies in the world, all over the world. The goals are the defense of biological biodiversity, that you for sure know in terms of, and then the notion of palimpsest I have already evoked, where we understand that what we perceive here and now in terms of landscape, it is a result of a lot of processes that are somehow changing the surface, but in a big depth. And then the main work of landscape architecture is to decipher, to understand this complex layered system, like the archaeologists do in the archaeological sites, to find in which way this new design can introduce new meanings.
Ahora va a pasar bastante rápido esta foto para que no se haga tan largo, digamos, con la traducción y todo, pero es como una herramienta básica que tenemos que tener para saber las nociones de lo que perseguimos y este proceso de transformación en el paisajismo. Y es una herramienta básica para entender que es un complejo sistema y que tenemos que hacer un esfuerzo para entender todas las capas que lo componen.
One key word in the contemporary debate was introduced 20 years ago, more or less, by Gilles Clément, the famous French landscape designer, but also agricultural engineer and botanist, an entomologist. And it is a notion of third landscape, which is somehow considered as something which is existing in between different situations and becomes very precious because it can start new processes where the defense of biodiversity is developing in an interesting way. The famous diagrams were working about primary set and preserves residual areas and spaces organized by men, assign to the residual areas that are now very common in the metropolitan context, yes, where the change of uses and the industrial dismission is producing a lot of empty lots. Somehow the residual areas are to be read as potentially very important sources for starting this new process that in landscape architecture we have to take care of.
Bueno, esto del tercer paisaje, en la evolución del paisaje, introducida por Gilles Clément, que era un paisajista, un ingeniero, botánico, escritor, influenció con sus teorías a todos los paisajistas europeos. Toma esto de la defensa de la biodiversidad y de nuevo tomamos esto de las áreas residuales, leerlas como un potencial paisajístico y en todo este contexto metropolitano y donde la industria dejó muchas áreas residuales.
This new category, which was introduced in the reflection and in the practice of designing about landscape, somehow introduce a great question, which is a potential of the urban wild, of the spontaneous vegetation, and also the role that a landscape architect could play in curating and not destroying all what it is already existing in this fringe, in this in-between areas. Today, there is much more interest in the urban wild from an aesthetic of thrift, which is a new keyword, very interesting. An aesthetic which is able to obtain the maximum result with the minimum effort. And it is based on the understanding that things that work have their own intrinsic beauty, and that conception of beauty and aesthetics change over time. And they change over time in relationship to the social and condition and the political condition. In a way, all what it is discussed about the third landscape, it's creating also a very important link between the aesthetical level, the ethical level, and the social and economical processes which are at the base of the new landscapes.
Crea una nueva categoría de reflexión y práctica. And then you said wild, spontaneous, and other keyword that I couldn't listen because the microphone go lower.
Okay. Yeah, the urban wild, the spontaneous vegetation, and the fact that landscape architect should take care of this spontaneous vegetation.
Spontaneous vegetation. Claro, que el paisaje tiene que cuidar toda esta vegetación espontánea, no hay que destruir lo que existe en las áreas intermedias y hay que intentar obtener el máximo resultado con el mínimo esfuerzo. También habla un poco de este concepto de belleza que cambia a lo largo del tiempo, y también otra cosa que cambia es la relación social y política, y cómo se discuten estos temas y estos problemas sobre el paisaje y la estética del paisaje.
So I now will show and discuss with you some few examples where all this question I was mentioning before were somehow realized with a very seminal design proposal, very important design proposal, which produced important effect within the debate. The first examples for sure to be analyzed, it is the Südgelände Naturpark in Berlin. We are in Germany. It's not a huge, it is a very big site. Formerly, it was a train yard, a very technical space with a unique use, completely taken away from a social and cultural use. Then technically it was not used any longer, and when the main activities stopped, a very interesting nature came back, providing completely new identity, completely new meaning, and even more completely new value to the place. Somehow they tried to introduce again some economical activity, but then the people inhabiting around this incredible space, we hear an aerial view where you can perceive very clearly the presence in the urban context. I was saying the inhabitants were fighting against the hypothesis of bringing back a kind of monofunctional economical use of the site, and they asked to preserve the natural elements which were spontaneously growing in the site, protecting so this new reserve of biodiversity, and introducing completely new uses exactly in reference to the existing building, which were then transformed with small intervention and assumed a very important cultural and social role in the definition of public space opportunities for the inhabitants.
Es el parque, can you go back to the first image? The Südgelände Naturpark in Berlin, un parque en Berlín. Es un lugar muy grande que tenía unos usos muy técnicos. Cuando la actividad humana paró, la naturaleza le dio toda una nueva actividad y todo un nuevo significado a este lugar. Los habitantes ahora piden preservar esta naturaleza y protegerla. Se busca introducir nuevos usos, y estos usos y toda esta intervención transforma y ocupa un lugar muy importante en la discusión y en la sociedad.
But what it is impressive of this idea was that starting from the demand of protecting biodiversity of this site, which was coming up from the inhabitants, somehow new idea of beauty, I would say beauties in a plural way, came up, showing that in the contemporary age, but was always true in the aesthetical reflection, this is very clear, the notion of a universal standard about what it is beautiful was discussed. And in a way, the abandonment and the relation with this nature unexpected, which was growing among the ruins of this technical system of devices, produced a completely new set, also, as I said, for new cultural activity and the social dimension of gathering. The idea of beauty, which is working in a site like this, it is in a way a different one from the organic classical idea, because it is a beauty which comes out from dissonance, a dissonant beauty where somehow contrast is working and where different possible behaviors are host in a new idea of common and shared place.
Bueno, el aspecto fundamental de esta intervención es proteger la biodiversidad, y fue una propuesta que vino de los propios habitantes, y también se empieza a discutir toda esta nueva idea de belleza o bellezas en plural. Entonces arranca toda una serie de reflexiones estéticas sobre este proyecto. Empieza la discusión, ¿qué es la belleza? Todas las ruinas de estos lugares que eran muy técnicos empezaron a alojar nuevas actividades culturales. Entonces, esta idea de belleza es distinta a la idea de belleza clásica, es una belleza disonante.
A similar reflection, of course, is stimulated by the famous, very famous, and now with a big success also in the common sense, which is a High Line in New York that you for sure know very well, which is somehow something which was produced first of all from the capacity of understanding the potential which was deposited in places that in the normal economical and commercial way of considering Manhattan were considered backyards without any value, without any possibility of reintroducing human function and human uses. The fact that someone started to make portraits, understanding that the nature which was growing spontaneously in the backyard, on top of an abandoned infrastructure in steel, produced both the possibility of imagining new spaces for leisure, but also new aesthetical value of places which were lost completely their specific identity.
Bueno, esto se volvió bastante exitoso, sobre todo por el High Line de New York, que todos deben conocer. Se vale en la capacidad de entender el potencial en un sentido más allá que del económico, que fue el sentido inicial. Cuando se reintroducen nuevos usos humanos y la naturaleza empieza a crecer espontáneamente en estos lugares, se adoptan también nuevos valores estéticos.
If we go back to see how was developed the design from the origin, this is very interesting. It becomes very clear that for sure this new understanding, which is an aesthetical experience of the value of the site, it is combined with a new sensibility towards the ecological values of the site in itself. But the work proposed by the big team who designed the High Line, and especially by James Corner, was that this new ecological function was not treated just in a quantitative way like the traditional ecological approach does, but was already understood as something which was driving a new aesthetical experience related to this ecological conditions, where biodiversity experience became something where feelings and knowledge and emotive intuition were combined all together, providing what in our reflection is for sure a complete aesthetical experience. Without forgetting that behind this transformation was necessary to have a very strong technical awareness of the implications that this transformation was bringing in relation to the existing situation, the infrastructure, and also the natural processes that on the infrastructure were developing by themselves.
Estas imágenes nos muestran cómo se fue desarrollando el diseño, creando toda una experiencia estética, toda una nueva sensibilidad a partir de valores ecológicos. Todo este equipo del Highline con James Corner creó una nueva función ecológica que no es cuantitativa como la ecología tradicional, sino que busca crear una nueva experiencia estética, ecológica, con biodiversidad. Esta es realmente una experiencia estética, un recorrido, y esta transformación tuvo que tener mucho cuidado en los detalles técnicos y en todo el aspecto infraestructural del lugar.
The next design has much more to do with the question of understanding a site, its ecological and geological, in this case, conditions, and the potential to produce a new opportunity of awareness of the origin and the tradition of the territory. We are here in Spain, where an abandoned mine systems was somehow leaving a big portion of territory in a very bad condition. Really was a disturbed site in a very strong way. The design proposed by RCR was somehow working about this disturbed site, proposing a new itinerary, which was opening a new narrative dimensions, able to explain in the organization of spaces and also in the definition of the material of the different parts of the composition, expressing the story, the history which was behind was at the origin of this situation. This is somehow something which has to do a lot with this idea of palimpsest I was mentioning at one point of my previous speech.
Bien, esta intervención nos permite entender el sitio desde una manera geológica y también el potencial como de los disturbios en el territorio. Este lugar era una mina abandonada, un sistema que estaba en muy malas condiciones, y este equipo, RCR, crea un nuevo itinerario con unas nuevas dimensiones narrativas. Y sobre todo prestan especial atención a la definición del material de la composición, este material que expresa la historia del lugar.
Again, to look at the drawings, it is always very impressive. In a way, the representation of the existing condition, it is dramatizing a lot, it is expressing in a strong way the fact that the channels left among the big cadastral, the big mountains of stones are the real space of the design, and the work is then to intervene in, to redefine the open space using this still elements and redefining new sequences where you experience the fact that you are in the deep, in the root, in the deep dimension of the ground, the minds. And then at one point, you can move along this new completely artificial topography until discovering at the end the original landscape, how it was before the extraction activity produced these big dramatic changes.
Bueno, que siempre es bastante fuerte ver estas imágenes de topografía, porque dramatizan mucho la representación actual de la Tierra. Todas estas piedras, montañas, y esta intervención lo que busca es redefinir espacios, crear nuevas secuencias y nuevas experiencias en distintas dimensiones y en distintos niveles de la piedra. Y al final de este recorrido se pueden ver cómo fue ante las condiciones actuales, las condiciones anteriores a toda esta extracción minera.
The last project I would like to share with you, it is going even further in the direction of the two examples we have seen before. We are now in France, in Lens, where the Louvre established a new museum in a very difficult context, because this is a minerary settlement completely connected just with the idea of excavating the ground. The project was a result of the collaboration between Seijima and Nishizawa Sanaa, very important architects. As you know, Seijima was a Pritzker Prize. And landscape architects, I find very, very interesting, who is developing a very personal poetic research about all the questions we were discussing before. Catherine Mosbach was the author of the Gardens, which is what I will show you more in depth today. And Sanaa was the author of the architecture of the museum.
El último ejemplo que vamos a ver va un poco más lejos que los otros dos, es en Francia, y es un nuevo museo en un contexto bastante difícil. Un segmento conectado mucho con excavar el suelo, y son de los arquitectos Seijima y Nishizawa, que tienen una investigación muy profunda, personal y poética sobre estos temas que estuvimos tratando. Seijima es el autor de Gardens, que después, más adelante en la exposición, lo veremos.
As you see in these photos, in the settlement, you still see the rest, what it is left from the extraction of the coal extraction activity on the background, which is constructing a new artificial topography, a new skyline. And then the rest of the settlements, it's something without too much quality, done of small houses, not too rich houses. And somehow the museum had to deal with these two elements. Catherine Mosbach started her work about the way to deal with the landscape, trying to understand the materiality of this specific territory, working about the vegetation, the local vegetation, working about the complex question of the soil in a kind of minerary settlements, and working about the dimension of textures. So a dimension of perception of this landscape, which goes from the panoramic dimension, what we saw before, the skyline dimension, until the tactile dimension, one-to-one, which is related to the soil structure. Once we touch it, we walk on it, and we look at it from close distance. These photos are somehow synthesizing the specific qualities of this landscape that, in the common opinion, is probably considered something completely far away from the traditional notion of beauty.
todo esto que quedó del extractivismo crea un nuevo horizonte en la ciudad. En la otra foto se podían ver como unas montañas al final, que crea un nuevo horizonte para esta ciudad. Ellos intentan entender la materialidad, la vegetación, la situación compleja del suelo y los minerales, esta dimensión entre texturas y este cambio, como cambio de escala entre el nuevo horizonte y las nuevas texturas, nuevos materiales.
The design Catherine Mosbach proposed for the park somehow assumes as a main question in the organization of all the different parts of the design, which is the question of the fact that here the amount of rain in the year is very high, so you have really a lot of rain and a lot of humidity, and somehow the water management, which could be considered just a very trivial question, is a problem that has to be solved. So the starting point for this new organization of the ground design is an idea, a very strong idea about how to solve this question of to treat the rain and to transform this relation with the water and with the rain is the main poetical aspect of the proposed design.
Una de las cuestiones principales que se tuvieron que tener en cuenta en el diseño y en la nueva organización del suelo fue que es un territorio con muchas lluvias altas, y manejar el agua no es un tema trivial, sino que suponía una real dificultad. Entonces, ¿cómo tratar el agua y transformar esto en una cuestión poética? Esa era una de las principales preguntas que se hicieron.
So the final result is a kind of performance about this question of the permeability of the original soil and the fragment of what was left from the human use of the soil in itself. So it is like a dramatization of the fact that the permeable surfaces in the settlements are very often broken, and when the use is abandoned, this become just not any longer meaningful fragments. And somehow this becomes a very poetic idea, where on this side we have fragments of sealed surfaces. On the other side, we have exactly the opposite. We have an organization of the ground surfaces in a way where the permeable and the non-permeable definition of the soil is producing a new local landscape where aridity and humidity produce the new landscape. These photos are really realized in moment when the rains comes and somehow work about the poetical dimension of this character. The idea it is that somehow the original soil, which was so much attacked by the extraction activities in the entire settlement, here could find a new condition for starting new uses and also new aesthetical dimensions.
Bueno, este es el resultado final, que es un resultado que muestra la permeabilidad y dramatiza todo este uso humano en una idea poética. Va entre una organización final que va entre lo permeable y lo no permeable y produce un nuevo paisaje. Esas fotos que mostró son de un día de lluvia, y este suelo original que fue muy atacado por la extracción, por el extractivismo, acá encuentra una salida poética, creando un nuevo paisaje.
The last images are somehow showing also a new approach to the question of soil. Soil is not any longer considered as just a mineral base for the life in the landscape, but is understood in its section as something living, where microorganisms allow unpredictable and also not always expected condition of life. This is a technique that Catherine Mosbach took from the traditional way of making retaining walls in the French countryside. The existence of microorganisms in this section of the ground allowed on the surfaces to grow a lot of very peculiar vegetation, peculiar and also changing along the seasons, producing in the visitors really a feeling and really a sensation of how nature could come back also in places where normally we don't imagine that nature could be. And somehow it is a very strong example of what I was starting from, working about biodiversity in this case, and working about a sustainable approach to the question of realizing a qualified fence for the museum. The aesthetic experience in this case is really able to build emotive intuition that combines, as I said before, feelings and knowledge.
Esto genera un nuevo acercamiento sobre el suelo, ya no es más una base en donde crece la vida, sino que toma el suelo como un objeto viviente como sí mismo. Estas paredes técnicas que son retaining walls serían como barreras, crea todo un sistema de microorganismos que hace que este muro, este suelo, sea viviente. Y esto produce sensaciones en todos los visitantes. Cómo la naturaleza aparece en lugares donde normalmente no, produce una serie de sensaciones y sentimientos en los visitantes y a la vez genera un acercamiento más sostenible, una experiencia estética sobre él.
This was my last image, so I hope I was not too long, and I hope it was all clear. So now, of course, if you have any questions, I'm here to answer you.
Bueno, estas fueron las últimas imágenes y espero que no haya sido muy largo y está abierta a escuchar preguntas de los alumnos. I think this was great examples for the site that we are working, because we are working on a portuary promenade, and there are some vacancies. Yesterday I was riding my bike on that zone, and the materials and the old materials, and I think they are pertinent, all the examples.
Okay, thank you.
Perdón, yo no sé lo que acabas de decir, Daniela.
Digo que estamos trabajando en un lugar con muchas vacancias y también que es extractivista y que me parecen muy pertinentes los ejemplos para lo que estamos trabajando.
Sí, de hecho, hago una aclaración, Daniela. En el momento en que ofrecemos la posibilidad de que pueda dar la charla Sara, me pidió el documento básico que está trabajando ustedes. Si tiene una información básica sobre el sentido, el cometido de nuestra tarea y algunas fotos del sitio de intervención.
Sí, es muy acertado, digamos, los ejemplos que hicieron. Y bueno, si quieren hacer alguna pregunta o algo.
¿Algunas preguntas más, gente, por favor?
Una de las imágenes que mostraba Sara, había una compilación de bibliografía que ella nombraba como una cuestión, no sé si decir básica, pero sí introductoria de temas que ella trató, y me gustaría, de ser posible, disponer de la bibliografía, ¿no? De los nombres de esos libros que ella presentó en una diapositiva. Agradecería mucho si nos puede habilitar esos títulos.
I think I can share my presentation. I can send you my PDF so that you see all the titles. Will you translate, please?
Sí, dice que te va
Daniela,
a
thank
mandar
you.
la
You're very
presentación.
nice, Daniela, thank you.
Dice que te va a mandar la presentación con los PDF, entonces vos podés ver tranquila después toda la bibliografía, Silvia.
Yo quería comentar que si es posible que tengamos, si es posible que tengamos algún material de la charla, yo no se lo pedí específicamente a Sara, pero sería importante si tuviéramos a lo mejor un PDF donde van a estar seguramente las bibliografías. Digo, no se lo pedí porque, bueno, por una cuestión de nos estábamos organizando, pero creo que sería un material de mucho valor para el trabajo del workshop.
He said that it would be great to have that video so we can go use that as bibliography for a project.
Okay.
¿Algo más, gente? Bueno, yo diría, Daniela y Sara, si no hay más preguntas, lo que nos queda es, por supuesto, agradecer la participación de Sara en el workshop y en nuestra casa, porque, insisto, ha estado presente no solo con nosotros, sino a través de la plataforma de YouTube, con otras personas que no están haciendo específicamente el workshop. Creo que nos deja un insumo muy importante para que podamos retomarlo como material de trabajo en el workshop, esta suerte de genealogía del paisaje que nos presentó, es un instrumento de trabajo, digamos. Y bueno, desde ya también reiterarle la invitación de que el día viernes, y miren cómo se van a poner los alumnos ahora de serio, el día viernes a las 12 horas nuestras, 17 horas de Italia, también por supuesto invitarla al momento de presentación de los trabajos producidos. Y desearle mucha suerte con todo lo que nos está pasando. Y hoy, antes de comenzar la charla, estábamos comentando cómo cada institución está tratando de llevar adelante procesos educativos, y diría que es un momento también de desearnos unos a otros suerte en el desarrollo de una experiencia totalmente diferente, más semipresencial en el caso de Piacenza y totalmente virtual en el caso nuestro, y no faltará oportunidad, querida amiga Sara, de que nos volvamos a encontrar con toda seguridad. Gracias.
Gracias. So, I say hello to everyone. Thanks for the invitation.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Sara.
Chao.
Chao.
Gracias, Sara.
Gracias, muchas gracias.
Gracias, saludos.
Saludos.
Les pido a los alumnos, les diría lo siguiente, son las 11:23. Hoy esta era la actividad central, pero nosotros nos reservábamos un espacio luego porque tendríamos que ver algunas cuestiones de los grupos, preguntas, algunos comentarios, etcétera. O sea que les diría que nos tomamos, si quieren, 15 minutos. ¿Les parece bien? No, recuerden, por cualquier cosa traten de no abandonar la sala, más bien se silencian, porque estamos teniendo esa dificultad a veces de poder reingresarlos. Nos silenciamos, sacamos las cámaras y en 15 minutos nos volvemos a encontrar.
Gracias. A las -20, por favor.
-20, bueno, gracias.
Miguel, corta la transmisión de YouTube.
¿Cómo es, Carlos?
Corta la transmisión de YouTube.
¿Y qué hago? ¿Corto arriba nomás directamente?
Vos sos el hospedador, sí.